James and I are getting divorced.
My wife's voice echoed through the ballroom. The applause stopped. For one long heartbeat, no one moved. Then 200 heads turned toward table 7. I didn't. My hands rested on the white linen. The glass of water in front of me hadn't moved since the salad course. Beside me, a man I barely knew shifted his chair an inch away, like humiliation might be contagious. Simone smiled into the microphone.
Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes you have to choose the life you're meant to have. Tonight, I'm finally choosing mine.
No one was looking at her anymore. They were all looking at me. I raised my hands and applauded. Once, twice, slowly. Then I folded them on the table and stared straight ahead, my jaw tight enough to ache. What Simone didn't know, what no one in that ballroom knew, was that 3 weeks earlier, after 8 months of negotiations, I'd told no one about, not even my own mother, I'd become the largest shareholder in the holding company that owned the firm she worked for. She thought she'd just ended our marriage on her stage. She had no idea she'd ended it on mine. When the program finished, I stood, shook exactly one hand, and left without a word to my wife. 22 minutes later, sitting alone in my car in the parking garage, I finally let my hand shake. Then I picked up my phone and texted my attorney 2 words.
It is time.
Eat before you leave this house, James. My mother said that every morning of my childhood, not as a suggestion, not as a reminder tacked onto the end of some other sentence, but as its own complete statement, delivered the same way every time, with the same weight behind it. Like she was saying something she genuinely believed the world might forget to do for me if she didn't say it first. Jane Ellison ran a catering operation out of our kitchen on Ashby Street from the time I was 8. Not a business yet. A reputation, passed hand to hand through church mothers who knew her food tasted like someone had actually thought about you while they made it. Not just cooked for you, but considered you the way good food does when the person making it understands that a meal is never really just about hunger. I started Ellison Logistics at 26 in the second bedroom of that same house with a folding table, a laptop with a cracked hinge, and a client list that was really just 2 people who trusted me more than they trusted anyone else at the time. By 31, I had 12 employees, a reputation that arrived in a room before I did. You're the first person in this room I've talked to tonight who isn't performing something. Simone Baker said that to me at a Buckhead fundraiser, near the auction table, standing in a suit I hadn't, bought for the occasion. I'd bought it for a pitch meeting 3 weeks earlier and was wearing it again because it had done well once and I was superstitious about things that worked. She said it the way some people say things that sound like compliments but are really just observations they haven't decided how to feel about yet. I said, I'm performing something. I'm just better at it. She laughed, not politely, but actually. The first time I brought her to Ashby Street, she stood in my mother's kitchen like she had always belonged there, laughing at something I said that wasn't particularly funny, and my mother watched her from the other side of the counter with an expression I recognized but didn't ask about until much later, when it would have been more useful to have asked about it sooner. For 2 years, we were easy with each other. Then, gradually, without either of us naming the exact moment it started, Simone changed, and I started second-guessing something I had been certain about, which is a particular kind of discomfort because you can't point to the thing that moved. The holiday party where it started was nothing, really. My husband, he does logistics, she told her CEO, and the month said good, with the specific tone people use when they have already decided to move towards someone more interesting and are simply finishing the motion of the current conversation before they do. I knew what that kind of nod meant. I had watched it happen to other people my whole career and told myself I was building something that would eventually make the nod irrelevant, which is a thing you can believe for a long time if you are busy enough. In the car afterward, she brought up a stylist, casual, like it had just occurred to her, testing the air between us for how it would land. I'll think about it, I said, which we both understood to mean I wouldn't, and neither of us pushed it further than that because pushing it would have required us to say what it was actually about, and we weren't there yet. Years on. A normal breakfast, the kind that doesn't feel significant until you are describing it to someone later. Darius would have had that client locked in 6 months ago. I moved fast enough to get us here. That's not a competition, James. But why do you always bring him up? I poured my coffee slower than I needed to. Not dramatically, just slower. The way you do when you are deciding whether the next sentence is worth saying. What time do you need the car? That was the whole conversation. And I let it be. One Tuesday, I came home to a red eye. My desk had been moved, my mother's photographs placed in a storage bin by the door like they were waiting to be donated. You didn't ask me, I said. I didn't think it needed a conversation, James. It's a room. It's my room. It's our house. When did you become like this, Simone? I said, and I felt the frustration come out louder than I had wanted it to. The kind that had been sitting somewhere behind my sternum for months looking for a door. I put the photographs back myself that night, quietly, so she would wake up to them already returned, and neither of us would have to decide whether it was a statement or just a correction. Neither of us brought it up again. It was late when she said it. Not angry, not even tired, just certain. The way people sound when they have been thinking about something long enough that the emotion has already passed through them and left only the conclusion behind. We were in the kitchen, the dishwasher humming between us, filling in the silence the way background noise does when neither person is ready to be the first one to speak into it. I got asked something tonight, she said, untying the silk scarf at her neck. What? Where you see yourself in 5 years. I rinsed my glass. Same place I've been. Building. She watched me for a second longer than necessary. Not watching me the way you watch someone when you're interested in what they'll say next, but the way you watch someone when you've already decided what you think, and you're giving them one more moment to surprise you. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. To you, she said. Then, quieter, James, are you expanding because you want to, or because you're afraid of staying exactly where you are? I dried my hands slowly on the dish towel, taking more time than the task required. Because sometimes the thing you need before you respond is not more words but more seconds. You think I'm standing still. I think, she said, steady now, choosing each word the way someone chooses footing on a steep surface, that I'm running and you're managing. That was the first time it occurred to me that she didn't see what I had billed as movement, just maintenance. She went upstairs before I could decide whether to argue. I opened my laptop instead, and I ran projections she would have called managing until well past midnight, which tells you something about me that I was not ready to admit at the time. By 10 the next morning, Raymond was on my phone. I need this to look clean, he said, in the voice he uses when something is already complicated and he needs you to understand the shape of it before you agree to anything. No shortcuts, no personal entanglements. If you step in as an operator, not as someone's husband. Understood. Understood. Prestige Holdings Group wasn't collapsing publicly, but its debt covenants were tightening in the way that precedes collapse without announcing it. The financial equivalent of a building settling before the foundation shows a crack. Apex operated under Prestige as its most profitable subsidiary, which meant instability at the parent level would land there first. The way water always finds the lowest point. My first lender declined within 48 hours. If the holding company falls, he said, in the patient tone of someone who has explained this before, you inherit the noise. Alma Washington at Premier Capital saw it differently. If I extend this facility, she said, sliding the term sheet back toward herself across the conference table in a motion that was both deliberate and unhurried, you are personally guaranteeing performance triggers. No hiding behind subsidiaries. I wouldn't. I know, she said. That's why we're still talking. Carlyle Meridian entered as a competing bidder, private equity out of Nashville, with more liquidity, less operational presence, and a number that came in 11% higher, which in any straightforward transaction would have ended the conversation before it started, which meant the decision shifted from price to governance, and governance is always about who you believe and why. The board meeting was called by the independent directors. Harold Fitch chaired that committee, former manufacturing executive, reputation for killing deals that smelled optimistic. The kind of man who has heard enough confident presentations to have developed a specific allergy to confidence that isn't backed by something he can verify on a single page. He opened the folder in front of him and looked directly at me. Mr. Ellison, I represent minority shareholders who don't have the luxury of experimentation. Why are you a lower risk than a better capitalized firm? Because that was the real question, not the number, but the reasoning behind the number and whether the reasoning had anything under it. Because I'm not financial engineer, I said. I'm integration. Your subsidiaries keep their management. I centralized back-end operations and refinanced debt over 36 months instead of stripping cost in 6. A Carlisle partner leaned back in his chair, not dramatically, just enough to signal that he had heard this kind of answer before and was deciding what category to put it in. You're assuming stability you can't guarantee. I'm assuming accountability. Fitch didn't smile. And if you're wrong, then my equity takes the hit before theirs does. Silence settled differently after that. Not the silence of a room that has nothing to say, but the silence of a room that is deciding something. They asked me to step outside while the independent directors voted. 10 minutes. I stood in the hallway and looked at nothing in particular and did not check my phone. They called me back in. Fitch closed a folder. The motion passes. 5-4. One vote. No applause. Just signatures and transition timelines. The specific, undramatic paperwork of a thing that had actually happened. I drove home and ate dinner alone at the counter. When Simone called to ask how my day went, I said fine, and meant it in the way you mean fine when something true has happened that you don't yet know how to make into a sentence for someone else. I didn't mention that the deal had closed 3 hours earlier. She asked again 2 nights later about work, not politely this time, not with the tone of someone making conversation, but with the tone of someone who has noticed a door that keeps not opening and wants to know why. I didn't look up right away. I didn't answer. That was my mistake, and I knew it while I was making it. The particular kind of mistake you watch yourself making and still don't stop, because stopping would require explaining something you haven't finished deciding yet. I let the silence stretch long enough to become its own answer. Something in her face closed, not angry, not dramatic. Final. She didn't ask about work again after that. The following week, she started sleeping in the guest room, framing it as jet lag from an Apex retreat, and I didn't challenge it, because challenging it would have required a question I wasn't ready to hear answered. 10 days before the gala, she sat on the edge of the bed while I was reading and said, without heat, without buildup, without any of the texture that usually precedes something important, I don't think we want the same life anymore. I think we do, I said. We're just bad at showing it. She studied me for a moment, weighing whether that was true or simply something I needed to believe enough to say out loud. And then she said, maybe, and turned off her lamp. That was the last real conversation we had before the ballroom. She had always believed that if you were going to say something, you said it yourself before someone else could say it for you. I understood that about her. I just didn't understand what it meant for us until she was standing at a podium in a room full of people holding their glasses and waiting for whatever came next. James and I are getting divorced, she announced, in front of the guests, in front of the room, in front of a table where I was sitting with a fork still resting against my plate from the last bite I hadn't finished. The applause didn't fade. It stopped. My water glass sat untouched, condensation spreading slowly on the linen, and somewhere under the shock, beneath the specific, airless quiet of a room that doesn't know what to do with what it just heard, a thought arrived. Small, petty, entirely mine. She has no idea what she just handed me. I let myself have it for 1 second. Then I brought my palms together. Twice. Slow. 22 minutes in the parking deck, sitting in the car with the engine off. I drafted a text to her, deleted it, drafted another, deleted that one too. Then sat with a blank screen for a while before I texted my attorney 2 words and put the phone face down on the passenger seat. The video appeared online before midnight, 47 seconds of the ballroom, clipped and shared until it had been watched 12,000 times by morning. The way things move now, fast and without anyone's permission. Picked up by people who weren't there and passed to people who don't know anyone involved and will have a strong opinion about it anyway. I knew it was out there. For 3 days, I didn't watch it. Raymond mentioned it once, and I told him I didn't need to see it, which was true in the same way that avoiding a mirror is true. Technically accurate, but not the whole story of why you keep walking past the hallway. On the 4th night, alone in my study with the door closed and the house quiet, I finally played it. Once. I watched myself sitting there, hands flat on the linen, expression composed in the way you are composed. When your body understands that moving is not an option and has simply decided to be still until the moment passes. And I looked from the outside like someone who had prepared for this. I hadn't. I stopped it before it reached part where I clapped. I already knew what that looked like from the inside. I didn't need the outside version to. The reaction split the way these things always do. Half the comments sympathetic, half already certain. I must have done something to deserve it. Because in a story like this one, If the woman is dramatic enough, the man must have been quiet enough for long enough that it was eventually going to cost someone something. My phone filled up with people I hadn't heard from in years. A college friend's two-word text, "You good?" My barber calling to talk about nothing in particular, which told me everything about what he actually wanted to say and couldn't find the framing for. At church that Sunday, a few men shook my hand a half-second shorter than they used to. Not noticeably, not insultingly, just slightly, the way small adjustments happen when people are recalibrating what they think they know about you. An old friend of my mother's squeezed my hand with both of hers and said, "We see you, baby," in a voice that carried more than the words alone should have been able to hold. The fallout reached the business too. 2 clients called to check in, one satisfied with what I told them, the other pausing a contract, pending clarity in the polite language businesses use when they want a reason to wait, without saying they're waiting for the smoke to clear around you. He never fully warmed back up, even after the truth came out later. Around that same week, I finally asked Simone about Darius directly, in a conversation that neither of us had been rushing toward, but that had been sitting at the end of every other conversation we tried to have for months. She didn't deny it. "I felt alone in this marriage for a long time, James," she said, in the voice of someone who has rehearsed the sentence enough times that the feeling has been replaced by the accuracy of it. "You were always building something. You were never actually here." It wasn't entirely untrue, and that was the hardest part of hearing it. Not the accusation, but the part of the accusation that had enough truth in it to prevent me from picking it apart the way I would have liked to. I asked her one more thing. "Did you ever try to tell me?" She looked at me for a long time, long enough that I noticed the quality of the silence changing, shifting from the silence of someone deciding what to say to the silence of someone who has decided the answer is the silence itself. She didn't answer. That was the answer. I drove to Ashby Street that night without calling ahead, because you don't call ahead when you're going to your mother's house and you don't know what you need yet. She didn't ask what had happened. She just looked at my face, the way my mother has always looked at my face, reading the way she reads a room when she walks into one. She's about to feed, and said, "Sit down, baby," and put a plate in front of me the way she has done my entire life, without ceremony, without fanfare, just food that meant someone had thought about me while they made it. Halfway through, she reached over and wiped something from the corner of my mouth with her thumb, exactly the way she did when I was 6 years old and couldn't be trusted to handle it myself, and I had to look down at my plate because my throat had gone tight and I didn't want her to see that the gesture had gotten through what the last week hadn't. She left her hand over mine for a while after that. It was more comfort than most of the conversations I'd had in years, and it didn't require a single sentence. Simone's attorney put out a public statement calling the acquisition retaliatory, and it landed harder than it should have. Not because it was convincing to anyone who knew the timeline, but because it gave a shape to a story some people were already looking for an excuse to believe. Then Carlisle Meridian filed a legal challenge against the valuation, and the board froze my authority while it was reviewed, and Denise called on a Thursday evening with the news in her usual even voice that I had come to understand was not calm but controlled, which is a different thing. "We might lose this," she said. "The vote margin was too narrow. I need you to prepare for that." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up, not panicking, not planning, just sitting with it the way you sometimes have to sit with something before you can figure out what to do about it. Raymond came by the office not long after, sat across from me without his usual noise, without the energy he normally brings into a room like weather, and said simply, "Tell me where we actually are." For the first time, I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is not something Raymond does naturally, and when I finished, he said, "Okay, what do we do next?" That question got me through that stretch more than any legal strategy did. Not because it had an easy answer, but because the act of asking it assumed that there was a next, and that was enough to start from. While the challenge was pending, Denise was working through the divorce's financial disclosures. And that's when the numbers stopped making sense in a specific way. That numbers stopped making sense when someone has moved them somewhere they weren't supposed to go, and hoped the distance would be enough to keep anyone from following them there. 2 client accounts, a regional print distributor and a mid-sized beverage company. Both longtime Apex clients had stopped being billed through Apex's normal invoicing system about 5 months back. The payments had been rerouted through a new LLC, registered under a name that traced back to a business address filed under Darius's mother's name. not hidden with any particular sophistication, just moved in the way people move things when they're in a hurry and telling themselves it's temporary. Simone's signature was on 2 of the vendor agreements. It's not sophisticated, Denise told me on the phone, in the same flat tone she uses for everything from routine filings to discoveries that would make most people raise their voice. About $140,000 moved through it over 5 months. The clients were told it was a transition of services ahead of a formal spin-off that was never filed with the state. I sat with that for 2 days before it reorganized itself in my mind into something larger than an affair, into a picture of 2 people building an exit and not looking closely enough at the material they were building it from. It didn't look, when I finally understood the full shape of it, like a long-running scheme built calmly and with foresight. It looked like panic with paperwork attached, invoices copied and reissued under a new letterhead before anyone had checked whether the new company was even properly formed. Careless in a specific way people are careless when they are improvising an escape and telling themselves it isn't theft because they intend to make it legitimate eventually. An intention has always felt, to the person holding it, like a reasonable substitute for the real thing. I don't think Simone believed she was stealing when she signed those agreements. I think she believed she was building a door for herself and didn't look closely enough at what she was building it out of. I told Denise to include it in the ethics complaint. Let outside counsel decide whether. It went further than that. And then I sat alone in my study for a while after the call because none of it felt like a win. It mostly felt tired. Darius didn't put up much of a fight once the redirected invoices were laid out in front of him. Not because he was cooperative by nature, but because a bank record with dates on it is a specific kind of argument that doesn't leave much room for a counterposition. He said, more or less, that it hadn't felt like theft while he was doing it. That he told himself the new company was simply going to formally take over the accounts once the paperwork caught up. It wasn't a particularly redeeming statement, but it was honest in the way that statements are honest when there is nothing left to lose by honesty. And it didn't hold up against the documentation in any way that mattered. Eventually, Carlyle's investors looked more carefully at what I actually was to the company. Not a passive buyer taking a position, but someone already integrated into the operational structure, already running parts of it, already accountable for what it did next. And they withdrew their valuation challenge. My position held, but the review dragged on for 2 more months, and one board member who had otherwise been fair to me told Denise privately that she still wasn't comfortable with how tangled the personal and professional had gotten in this deal, regardless of how it ended. The discomfort never fully went away, and I didn't blame her for it. When I finally stood in front of the full board, it was not a room that wanted me there. It was a room that had agreed to hear me, which is a different thing, and I walked in understanding the difference. Harold Fitch asked the question he had clearly been sitting on since the beginning. Mr. Ellison, would you have pursued this investment if your wife hadn't humiliated you publicly at this firm's event? I had 8 months of work on this before that night, I told him, meeting it directly. Bank records, a competing bid, a timeline you can check against any date you want. I'd ask you to look at the paperwork before you look at the marriage. The room went quiet, and Fitch didn't ask another personal question, though he never said he was satisfied either, and I didn't expect him to. I put the misdirected invoice findings on the table alongside the conduct question and asked the board to treat both the same way they would treat any client fraud discovered inside the firm, plainly, by policy, without special handling because of who was involved. Then I thanked the room and left. Simone didn't speak during the whole meeting. She just watched me with the expression of someone trying to decide whether what they are watching is what they expected or something else entirely. What came after didn't resolve as cleanly as I would have liked. Darius was let go. The firm pursued repayment rather than criminal referral, since the full amount was recovered within the month. Simone resigned before the formal findings were released. Her attorney called it a cleaner exit, and part of the exit agreement included her repaying her share of what had moved through that account. The client who had paused during the video never fully came back. The settlement on the marriage itself was simple. She kept what was hers. No claim on the business. 3 weeks to finalize. The kind of ending that is merciful in its brevity and still costs something that paperwork can't name. She came for the last of her boxes a few days after the board meeting. I stood in the study doorway while she moved through the house. Not helping, not hindering. Just present the way you are present when something is ending and you have decided that witnessing it is the only thing left that belongs to you. In the hallway, holding a box, she stopped. Did you ever feel like I respected you? I didn't answer right away. I think you respected what I could give you. I said finally, I don't know if you ever really saw the rest of it. I'm not sure I made that easy, either. She was quiet a moment. Maybe we were both hiding something, she said. I just did it louder. I didn't have a clean answer for that. Probably, I said. At the door, her hand on the frame, she didn't turn around. You deserved better than how I treated you. So did you, I said, and meant it more than I expected to. She left. The house went quiet in the ordinary way a house goes quiet, not the way it does in stories, with weight and significance and a closing chord. Just the normal, undramatic quiet of a space that now has one less person in it. 6 months later, the Charlotte office opened. Alma Washington came down for it, shook my hand, and said only I knew, and didn't explain further, and I didn't ask her to. Because some things are more complete without the explanation. That last evening of the year, I sat in my study with the photographs back on the wall, my mother's photographs returned to where they had always been, and I thought about the man who had sat still at table. 7, hands flat on the linen, composure assembled from whatever was available in the moment. Not because I had finally figured him out. Some nights I still didn't fully recognize him, but because I had spent 11 years believing that staying quiet was the same as staying strong, that endurance was its own kind of answer, and that the people who loved you would eventually understand what you meant by it. It kept me steady. It also kept me alone long before anyone noticed, including me. Winning a company didn't teach me the difference between those two things. It just gave me a quieter room to keep working it out in. I turned off the light. I didn't know yet what the next year would look like. I only knew I would stop mistaking silence for peace. If you were in James' position, would you have handled it differently? Comment your answer below. I read every single one. Don't forget to like this video and click the subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next.